In the heart of Africa, where the forest breathes with ancient whispers and the sun kisses the treetops each morning, lived a girl named Maya. She was just 9 years old, but already she knew what it was like to be alone. Her parents had died when she was very young, leaving her to be raised by her grandmother. The village felt like a place she didn't quite belong to. It was in the forest, with its towering trees and soft, earthy smells, that Maya found solace. She would often wander its paths, drawn to the peaceful quiet that enveloped her there. One morning, after a night filled with the distant sounds of poachers' gunshots and the eerie cries of animals in distress, Maya ventured deeper into the forest than she ever had before. Something felt off, but curiosity pushed her forward. Broken branches littered the ground, and the usual chorus of birds was absent. It was then that she heard a soft, almost imperceptible sound, whimpering as if a creature was in pain. Her heart quickened as she followed the sound, moving cautiously through the underbrush. And there, huddled beneath a bush, she saw it. A tiny, trembling gorilla, no older than a few months. His fur was matted with dirt, and his tiny chest heaved with shallow, panicked breaths. His wide, frightened eyes met hers, and for a moment, neither moved. Maya knew deep in her gut that he was alone, just like her. She should have run. The elders had told stories of wild animals that could tear a man apart with a single swipe. But this baby, he wasn't a threat. He was scared, vulnerable. In that moment, Maya saw something in his eyes that mirrored her own pain. Her hands shook as she extended one towards him. He didn't flinch. Instead, he slowly moved closer, as if drawn to the kindness in her eyes. Without thinking, Maya gently picked him up, wrapping him in a piece of cloth she had brought with her. She whispered soft words to him as she carried him back, her heart racing with a mix of fear and tenderness. She named him Kumba, meaning roar of the earth, a name her father had once spoken of in his old stories. Though Maya had no idea what to do, she knew she couldn't leave him there. She took him home, feeding him mashed bananas and cleaning the dirt from his fur. Each night he slept beside her, curling up in her arms as if he had always belonged there. In the days that followed, their bond grew stronger. Kumba would mimic Maya's laughter, clapping his hands in delight whenever she smiled. He followed her everywhere, from the garden to the riverbank, his tiny fingers gripping her clothes as he tried to climb trees just like she did. She had never had a companion so loyal, so full of life. And in return, he found safety, comfort, and love in her. Maya and Kumba, two creatures from different worlds, had found a bond that couldn't be broken. As the days turned into months, Maya and Kumba grew up together in the wild, their bond deepening with each passing moment. Kumba, once small and fragile, began to grow at an alarming rate. His tiny hands soon became powerful, his legs strong enough to carry him across the rough terrain of the forest with ease. Maya could hardly believe how quickly he was changing, but in her eyes he would always be the baby she found that fateful morning. Their days were filled with laughter and play. Maya would climb trees, and Kumba, now a little more agile, would try to follow her, his heavy bodies struggling but never giving up. They swam in the river together, and at night they would sit side by side beneath the stars, Maya telling stories of her childhood, Kumba listening quietly as though he understood every word. But as Kumba grew, the villagers began to notice the strange sight of a young girl and a massive gorilla living side by side. Whispers started to spread, some with curiosity, others with fear. They didn't understand the bond that had formed between Maya and Kumba, and they certainly didn't know how to handle it. One evening, a group of villagers gathered near the edge of the forest, talking in hushed voices. Maya overheard them as she approached, Kumba by her side, his massive body almost brushing against her. They spoke of danger, how the gorilla was no longer a small, harmless creature, but a full-grown, unpredictable animal. "It's too dangerous," one of the men said. "A gorilla that big could destroy everything in its path." Maya's heart sank. She wanted to tell them they were wrong, that Kumba wasn't dangerous, that he had been her protector and her friend, that he understood her in ways no one else ever could. But the fear in their eyes, the way they looked at Kumba as though he were some sort of ticking time bomb, made her pause. The next day, a man arrived in the village, a wildlife ranger who had heard of the girl living with the gorilla. He was calm but firm, telling Maya that it wasn't safe for her or Kumba. He explained that gorillas were wild creatures, and though Kumba had grown fond of her, the danger was inevitable. He warned her that Kumba needed to be taken to a wildlife sanctuary, where he would be safe and could live out his life with others of his kind. Maya felt a knot form in her stomach. She couldn't imagine life without Kumba. The thought of him being locked away in some unfamiliar place, far from her, made her chest ache with a pain she couldn't put into words. But what choice did she have? She was just a girl, and they were right. Kumba wasn't like the other animals in the village. That night, as they sat under the stars once more, Maya whispered to Kumba. She told him everything would be okay, that he would be safe, even though she wasn't sure she believed it herself. Kumba, sensing the change in the air, looked at her with his big, dark eyes. His face was serious, but there was no anger, no confusion. He simply sat beside her, as he always had, his large frame pressed against hers for comfort. The next morning, Maya and Kumba stood at the edge of the forest, watching as the wildlife ranger's truck pulled up. Maya's hands trembled as she looked at Kumba one last time, her heart breaking with the knowledge that she had to let him go. But as they loaded him into the truck, Kumba turned to Maya, and for a brief moment their eyes locked. She whispered softly, "I'll never forget you, Kumba. I love you." And with that, the truck drove away, taking the only family Maya had ever known. Years passed, and life went on for Maya, though something was always missing. She had grown into a young woman, and while she had made new friends in the village, no one truly understood her like Kumba had. The laughter that once filled her days now felt distant, as if it belonged to another time. But the memories of Kumba remained vivid in her heart, never fading. Maya had often wondered what happened to him after he was taken away. She tried to move on, to accept the separation, but deep down, a part of her always held on to the hope that one day, their paths might cross again. She became involved in wildlife conservation, dedicating herself to protecting the gorillas and other animals she had grown to love. It was her way of honoring Kumba, even though she knew she could never bring him back. One day, when Maya was 18, she found herself back at the wildlife sanctuary where Kumba had been taken all those years ago. She had been volunteering there for months, assisting the rangers with their efforts to protect the animals. And yet, she couldn't help but wonder, was Kumba still there? Had he forgotten her? She had heard rumors from the other volunteers that a large, dominant silverback had taken control of the gorilla troop. Maya couldn't shake the thought that it might be Kumba. She had to see for herself. So, she made her way deep into the forest, where the gorillas roamed freely within the protected area. The air was thick with the scent of earth and vegetation, and the sounds of the forest surrounded her. Her heart raced with anticipation, and a strange sense of nervousness washed over her. After hours of walking, she reached a clearing, and there, standing tall and powerful, was the silverback. His dark fur glistened in the sunlight, his massive frame towering over the others in his troop. Maya's breath caught in her throat. It was him. There was no mistaking it. Kumba had grown into a powerful, majestic gorilla, far beyond the little baby she had once known. Yet, despite the years that had passed, she still saw the same familiarity in his eyes, those deep, intelligent eyes that had always understood her. Maya stepped forward slowly, her voice trembling as she called his name. "Kumba, is that you?" For a long moment, Kumba didn't move. He simply stared at her, his expression unreadable. Maya felt a surge of emotions, hope, fear, love, and sadness, all mixed together in her chest. She took another step closer, unsure of what would happen next. And then, something incredible happened. Kumba took a few slow steps forward, his eyes never leaving hers. He let out a low grunt, a sound she knew all too well. It was his way of acknowledging her, his own way of saying he remembered her. Maya's heart leapt in her chest. She reached out, almost instinctively, as if trying to close the gap between them. But then, Kumba stopped. He was no longer the baby gorilla who needed her. He was a leader now, with a family of his own. The silverback turned his attention to the other gorillas, his troop now gathered around him. Maya understood. This wasn't the same Kumba she had raised. He had become part of something bigger, something wild and untamed. Maya stood still, watching him, the emotions swirling inside her. She realized that, as much as she had wanted to bring him back into her life, Kumba was no longer hers to keep. He had found his place in the wild, with his own kind. For a moment, they just looked at each other, their bond still strong, but different. Maya smiled softly, knowing this was the way it was meant to be. She had raised him with love, and now he had a life of his own, one she could never be a part of. As Kumba turned and walked away, Maya watched him disappear into the jungle, his massive frame melting into the shadows of the trees. She didn't cry. Instead, she felt a deep sense of peace, knowing that, in some way, she had given him the freedom he deserved. Maya returned to her life in the village, but the encounter with Kumba stayed with her, lingering in her heart. The connection they had shared, so pure and unbreakable, had left her with a sense of quiet peace. She no longer mourned the absence of the young gorilla she had raised, for she knew he was exactly where he was meant to be. Still, a part of her wondered how different her life might have been if things had played out differently. As the years passed, Maya became a well-known figure in the community, recognized not only for her work in conservation, but for the story of the girl who had raised a gorilla as her brother. Her bond with Kumba had captured the hearts of many, and people traveled from distant places to hear her story. Maya became an advocate for the protection of wildlife, speaking at schools, conferences, and forums, sharing the lessons she had learned from the jungle and the animals she had come to love. One day, as she sat in her small cottage, sipping tea, Maya received a phone call that would change everything. The voice on the other end was familiar, but it took her a moment to recognize it. "Is this Maya?" the voice asked. "It's Daniel from the Wildlife Sanctuary. I'm calling to tell you something. Something you need to hear." Maya's heart skipped a beat. "What's happened? Is everything okay?" There was a brief pause before Daniel continued, his voice more somber. "We've been monitoring Kumba for years. He's been the leader of the troop for a while now, and recently, well, we've noticed something strange. There's been a shift in his behavior. He's been looking for you, Maya. He's been trying to make contact." Maya's breath caught in her throat. Kumba had been searching for her? Could it be true? After all these years, was he reaching out to her again? "I know this sounds crazy," Daniel said, "but we think it's time for you to come back. Kumba, he needs you, Maya. We don't know why, but we think there's something he wants to tell you." Maya didn't need to think twice. Without hesitation, she packed her bags and made her way to the sanctuary once more, the excitement and uncertainty rising within her. Her heart raced as she thought about seeing Kumba again, but she couldn't shake the question, why now? When Maya arrived at the sanctuary, she was led deep into the forest, just as she had been so many years ago. The air was thick with the scent of earth and leaves, and the sounds of the jungle surrounded her like old friends. This time, there was no fear, no hesitation. She was ready. As they reached the clearing, Maya's breath caught in her chest. There, standing in the distance, was Kumba. He was bigger than she remembered, his silverback glistening in the sunlight, and yet, the moment their eyes met, it was as if time had stood still. He hadn't forgotten her. He still remembered. Maya stepped forward, calling his name softly, her voice trembling. "Kumba, is it really you?" Kumba let out a low grunt, his eyes locked onto hers. Slowly, he made his way toward her, each step measured and deliberate. Maya could hardly believe what she was seeing. It was as though he had been waiting for her all these years. When they finally stood face to face, Kumba stretched out his hand, the same hand that had once gripped her so tightly in the forest. Maya hesitated for a moment before reaching out, her fingers brushing against his. It was as if they had never been apart. For the first time in years, Maya could feel the full weight of the love that had always existed between them. Kumba had come back, not just to see her, but because he needed her in a way she hadn't understood until now. There was no question. Their bond was unbreakable, no matter how much time had passed. The two stood there, side by side, silent for a while, as if sharing a moment that belonged to only them. Maya realized that even though Kumba had found his place in the wild, his journey had never truly been about separation. It had always been about finding their way back to each other. And so, as the sun began to set over the jungle, Maya knew that this moment, this reunion, was the closure she had always needed. Kumba was home, and so was she. They were together again, not as girl and gorilla, but as two beings who had shared a story that would live on forever. Years passed since Maya's reunion with Kumba, and the world had changed. The memories of the girl and the gorilla who had shared a bond like no other became a legend, whispered about in villages far and wide. Maya had become a symbol of the unbreakable ties between humans and animals, a living testament to the power of love and connection that transcended species. Her work with the sanctuary continued, and the message she carried with her reached hearts across the globe. But for Maya, life had taken a new turn. She had found peace, not just in her work, but in her own heart. Kumba was now the leader of a thriving troop, his once wild eyes softened by age and wisdom. The gorilla had built his family, and though Maya no longer lived with him in the forest, they had come to an understanding, an unspoken bond that remained as strong as ever. One crisp morning, Maya stood at the edge of the sanctuary, looking out over the lush green landscape. It had been years since she had seen Kumba up close, but she knew he was there, somewhere in the depths of the jungle, carrying on with his life. Still, there were moments, quiet moments, when she would feel a pang of longing in her chest, as if a part of her was still out there with him. But those moments never lasted long. She had learned to embrace the life she had built, surrounded by the people and animals she cared for, knowing that Kumba was living his life as he should. It was then that she heard a rustling behind her. She turned, her eyes wide with surprise, as a familiar figure emerged from the trees. Kumba stood there, looking at her with those deep, intelligent eyes, his silverback gleaming in the sunlight. It took her a moment to process what she was seeing, but as soon as she did, her heart leapt in her chest. Kumba had come to find her, again. Without a word, Maya stepped forward, and just like all those years ago, Kumba closed the distance between them. His massive hand reached out, not in a sign of dominance, but in recognition, as if to say that he had never truly left her, even when they had been apart. Maya stretched out her hand, and for a moment, it was as if time stood still. She could feel the warmth of his touch, the familiarity that only comes from a bond forged in the deepest parts of the soul. The jungle around them fell quiet, as if holding its breath, watching the reunion unfold. And in that moment, Maya realized that life had come full circle. Kumba had grown into his own, and so had she. They were no longer just a girl and a gorilla, but two beings who had lived through something extraordinary, something that no one could ever take away from them. Maya smiled softly, her heart filled with a quiet joy. She knew that Kumba would always be a part of her, and she, a part of him. The love they shared, the lessons they had learned, would remain forever etched in their hearts. There was no need for words between them. Their bond spoke louder than anything else. And so, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Maya and Kumba stood together in the clearing, side by side, as they had once done so long ago. The forest was alive with the sounds of the wild, the trees swaying gently in the wind. Maya knew that, just like the jungle, their bond would continue to grow, deep and strong, forever. Maya continued her work with the sanctuary, but the presence of Kumba never left her mind. The bond they shared had grown into something greater than the simple connection between a girl and a gorilla. It had evolved into something sacred, an unspoken understanding that transcended time, distance, and the limitations of language. It was a bond that had shaped her life in ways she could never fully explain. Over time, Maya became an even more influential figure in wildlife conservation, her name known far and wide as the girl who had raised a gorilla like a brother. Her story inspired countless people around the world to take action, to fight for the protection of wildlife, and to recognize the deep emotional intelligence of animals. But for Maya, the true gift had always been the relationship she had with Kumba, a relationship that defied all odds. One evening, as Maya stood on the balcony of her small cottage, gazing out at the horizon, she thought about the future. She had done everything she could to ensure that Kumba's legacy would live on, not just as an animal in the wild, but as a symbol of hope. She had spent countless hours working with researchers, helping to build sanctuaries and protect habitats, always with Kumba's story in her heart. Yet, there was a part of her that still wondered if she had done enough. Her thoughts were interrupted by a soft knock on the door. Maya turned to find one of the rangers standing in the doorway, a solemn look on his face. "Maya," he said quietly, "you need to come with me. It's about Kumba." Her heart skipped a beat. "What's happened? Is he okay?" The ranger hesitated, then spoke with a heavy heart. "Kumba's been injured. He's been in a fight with a rival silverback. We think it's bad, Maya. He's not responding well." Maya's stomach twisted. Without thinking, she grabbed her jacket and followed the ranger. Her mind raced with worry, but she pushed it aside, focusing only on reaching Kumba. As they made their way through the dense forest, Maya's thoughts were a whirlwind. She couldn't help but think back to the times when Kumba was just a small baby, vulnerable and weak, relying on her for everything. Now he was the protector of his troop, a dominant silverback leading with strength and wisdom. But no matter how strong he had become, Maya knew that in some ways he would always be the gorilla she had raised with love. They arrived at the clearing where Kumba had been found. His massive frame was slumped against a tree, blood staining his fur. Maya's breath caught in her throat as she knelt beside him. Despite the injuries, his eyes, those familiar eyes, looked up at her with a sense of recognition. It was as if he was relieved to see her, as though he knew she was there to help. Kumba groaned softly, and Maya gently placed her hand on his large shoulder, tears welling up in her eyes. She whispered his name, "Kumba, I'm here. I'm not going anywhere." The rangers worked quickly, assessing his injuries and making plans for treatment. But Maya stayed by his side, offering comfort in the only way she knew how. She spoke softly to him, recounting the days they had spent together in the forest, reminding him of the bond they shared, the memories that could never be erased. She knew Kumba needed her strength, and for that moment, she was all he had. Hours passed, and eventually, Kumba's condition began to stabilize. The rangers had managed to stop the bleeding, and while he was still weak, he was no longer in immediate danger. Maya stayed with him through the night, refusing to leave his side. She couldn't shake the feeling that in some way, this was a turning point. Kumba had always been the one to protect her, but now, in this moment, she had become the one to protect him. By morning, Kumba had regained enough strength to stand, though he was still unsteady. Maya helped him up, her hand resting gently on his broad back. "You're going to be okay, Kumba," she said softly, her voice full of reassurance. The rangers had made arrangements for him to stay in a more secure area of the sanctuary until he fully recovered. Maya watched as they led him to the medical station, knowing that Kumba was in good hands. But as she turned to leave, she glanced over her shoulder one last time. Kumba's eyes met hers, and for a brief moment, their gaze locked, and in that moment, Maya knew that nothing could ever break the bond they shared. She had protected him, just as he had once protected her. And in the end, they had both found their place in the world, not just as girl and gorilla, but as two souls intertwined by a love that was stronger than anything else. The days following Kumba's injury were a blur for Maya. She stayed by his side, monitoring his recovery with the same care she had given him as a baby. Despite the initial shock of seeing him hurt, she found comfort in knowing that he was strong, that the years of survival in the wild had built him into a resilient leader. Yet, deep inside, Maya knew the moment she had feared had arrived. The one where their lives, though forever intertwined, were destined to follow different paths. Weeks passed, and Kumba's wounds healed, but something had changed. He was quieter now, less the confident leader he had once been, and more contemplative. Maya could see it in the way he looked at her, as if searching for something she couldn't provide anymore. The gorilla she had raised had grown into his own, and the time had come for him to fully embrace his place in the jungle, to take on the role he had been born to fulfill. One evening, as Maya walked along the edge of the sanctuary, the familiar sound of footsteps behind her made her pause. Turning around, she saw Kumba, standing a few yards away, his massive form outlined by the fading light of the setting sun. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The air was thick with an unspoken understanding that neither of them wanted to acknowledge. Maya took a deep breath, her heart heavy. "Kumba," she said softly, "you've healed, you've grown, and you've led your troop. You've done everything I could have ever hoped for." Kumba's gaze held hers, but there was a sadness in his eyes. Slowly, he began to walk toward her, his movements deliberate and slow, as though he was savoring the last moments they would spend together. When he reached her, he stopped and looked at her with a tenderness that made Maya's heart ache. In that moment, she knew. She knew that Kumba had come to say goodbye, not because he wanted to, but because he had to. He had a family now, a future that belonged to the jungle. And Maya, as much as it hurt, knew that it was time for her to let go. She had always known that their time together would come to an end, but it didn't make it any easier. "I'll always love you, Kumba," she whispered, her voice breaking. "You'll always be my brother." Kumba reached out with his large hand and placed it gently on her arm. It was a gesture of comfort, of finality. He wasn't leaving because he didn't care. He was leaving because he had found his place in the wild, a place where he could truly be free. Maya's tears fell freely, but she knew this was the right thing. This was what Kumba had always needed, to live as a silverback, to lead his troop and thrive in the wild. The moment lingered between them, and then, without another word, Kumba turned and walked back into the forest. Maya watched him disappear into the shadows, knowing that this was their final farewell. It was painful, more painful than she could have ever imagined. But it was also beautiful. Because in that moment, she realized something important. Their bond had never been about ownership or possession. It had always been about love, unconditional and pure. The forest was quiet for a while, and as the sun dipped below the horizon, Maya stood alone, her heart full of gratitude for the time she had shared with Kumba. She knew she had done her part, that she had raised him with love and care, and now it was his time to lead the life he was meant to. Maya smiled through her tears, knowing that she would always carry him with her, no matter where she went. Kumba had given her a gift that no one could ever take away, the knowledge that love, in all its forms, was the most powerful force of all. As the moon rose high in the sky, Maya made her way back to the sanctuary, a sense of peace settling over her. She had loved and been loved by the wild, and she knew that Kumba, wherever he was, was doing exactly what he was meant to do. He was free, and so was she. A young girl, around 10 years old, with bright eyes and an adventurous spirit, gently holding the hand of a young gorilla, both sitting together in the heart of a lush green jungle. The girl's face radiates affection, while the gorilla looks at her with a calm, almost human-like gaze. The atmosphere is warm, with sunlight filtering through the trees, casting dappled shadows on the ground. The girl is wearing simple, earthy clothes, and the gorilla is a small, playful figure, still learning to navigate the jungle with the girl by his side. The jungle around them is alive with vibrant plants and towering trees, and there's a sense of deep, mutual trust between the two, as though they belong together in this magical moment.